So today I'm going to be showing you guys the best and meta loadout for every single operator in the game. I'm going to be going over what guns are best on every operator and what gadgets are most useful in most scenarios. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to be starting out with the attackers. So we're just going to go down the line. So with Striker, definitely going to be running his M4 and his shotgun. And the gadget is based on the scenario you're in. I usually just run frags and flashes unless I'm going to run EMPs for the wall or something. But that's kind of dependent on what map you are and what site they are. For Sledge, I always recommend using the L8. You don't really want to have a shotgun on attack. And then a secondary, he only has the pistol. And then I usually run frags, but flashes are also a good option for his gadget. Thatcher has the same loadout as Sledge, pretty much, except he has access to the AR-33. It's really whichever one you want. The L8 is better, but some people just prefer the AR-33. I usually just swap between them. The L8 has more damage, though, so I'd probably recommend the L8. And then Gadget, I usually run Claymores on him, because when you play Thatcher, you're going to be getting the main wall, and you're going to want to put Claymores on the windows and doors so you can't get ran out on while you're getting main wall. Ash, you're definitely going to want to run the R4C, never going to touch the G36, even after the most recent buff. The R4C is just better. And then pistol, it's really up to you. I just use this one because I have black ice on it. And then for gadget, I usually rock the claymores, but breaching charges are also pretty good. That'll get you 5 soft breaches per round because you already have the launcher. For thermite, you're definitely gonna want to run the 5.56. You're never touching the shotgun. The shotgun's horrible. Pistol, same thing as before. It's just whichever one you like more. This one does more damage, but this one has more ammo and more magazine size. And then gadget, personal preference. I run smokes because whenever I run thermite, I usually take the diffuser, so I run the smokes to maybe go for a plant. But if you're going to be more like entry fragging with thermite after you get the main wall, then I'd run the stuns. So for Twitch, the F2 is her best gun, but if you're not good with that gun and the recoil is just way too much, the 417 is also a great thing, great DMR, does almost 70 damage. I mean, it's great DMR. If you're not confident with the F2, then run that. Pistols, you're going to want to run the P9. The P9 is just all around better than the revolver. And then gadget, I usually run the claymores, but smokes are also good. If you're not going to really sit outside on your drones, then I'd run the smokes. But if you're going to be sitting outside actually using your util, I'd run claymores. For Monty, you obviously have to run the shield. And then for the pistol, the P9, because it actually has magazine size, because the revolver only has 6 shots in it. Definitely not going to want to use the revolver on Monty. Gadget, it's kind of depending on the situation. Like, sometimes you might want to run hard breaches. Sometimes your team might need you on EMPs, but I just default to running the smokes, because if you're on Monty, you're taking the bomb every time pretty much, and smokes are just good for making the plant play. But you got to be able to switch. That's how it is with a lot of the secondary gadgets. So for glass, he only has one primary, and you're definitely not going to be using either of these. You're going to have to run the Barry 9, because that would be your only automatic gun. And if you're not using smokes on glass, you're a bot. So definitely not going to want to touch either of these besides the smokes. For fuse, it kind of depends on what your team's doing. If you're getting on him to join the shield rush, your team's all going shields, and obviously put on the shield. But by default, I put the AK on. The LMG's not bad per se, but the AK-12 is just all around better. I guess it is up to personal preference at the end of the day. If you like LMGs, then run the LMG. And then for the secondary gadget, I would either run the hard breach or the soft breach, either one, because if you're going fuse, you're going to be playing vert. If you want to get the hatch, run the hard breach. If you want to just make vert and you don't have a ram or a buck going with you, I'd run soft. Blitz, you don't have any options. You have to run the shield and you have to run the P12. For the device, I would probably go smoke. Same kind of idea of Monty. You're gonna have the defuse if you're on the shield. You want to make the play. But if you're not going to have the defuse, if you're doing like a shield rush, maybe I'd go the breach charges. I don't know. It's personal preference on which one. It kind of depends on the scenario. For IQ, both of her guns are pretty valid. The LMG is what I personally use because I really just like the LMG. The Commando is also a great gun. It does more damage. Obviously has less fire rate and magazine size. The AUG is just never a good pick. The AUG's the worst of these three. And then the P12 as your secondary. I run frags, but breach charges are also good. For Buck, I always recommend using the C8. His DMR is just not good. And the C8 does not have that much recoil. Then you got to use his only pistol and then run flashes on Buck because you're going to be an entry frag. Not going to want to run claymores. For Blackbeard, if you got like a crazy trigger finger or a Cronus, I would use this DMR, but if not, I'd stick to the AR and then frags on Blackbeard. It's just OP. Not going to want to waste that on running claymores over frags. For Capital, I usually run the Para, but I mean, I was on the LMG because I was just like using it to test it out. It's not a bad pick. They got the same fire rate. LMG does a little less damage with a lot more magazine size. I mean, it's up to you. The LMG also has a little more recoil. The Para is just a better gun in my opinion. And I use the Gon 6 on him along with EMPs normally, but Claymores wouldn't be bad or hard breaches, just like I said, depends on the scenario. For Bana, you're usually going to want to run the AR unless you're like going to rush in and it's a close quarter fight, then maybe hop on the shotgun with the Bearing 9 secondary. Whenever an operator has a secondary machine pistol or just a pistol, you're always going to run the like SMG type of gun. Then run flashes on Bana unless you're going to be playing Burt, then maybe breach charges would be better. If you guys do decide to run Jackal now that he's been nerfed into the ground, I would use the C7E. The PDW is not a great pick, but some people do like it more, so. And then the shotgun is never really a good idea unless you're just going to rush in and drop a hatch. You're just going to be in sight, maybe run the shotty. Secondary, you're usually going to want to stick with the shotgun. Sometimes maybe you'd want to run the pistol if you're like maybe using the shotgun, his main shotgun, you'd want to use the pistol. I run claymores on Jackal, but it's personal preference. Ying, you're definitely going to want to use this LMG. She only has one pistol, and you're going to want to run in the smokes to just cause even more distractions with your Yings and the smokes. It's OP. Zofia, you're definitely going to want to use the M7. The LMGE is the worst LMG in the game. As you can see, that recoil pattern is just insane. It's almost unusable if you're not using a cheating device. And then the pistol, she only has one pistol. It does have a little reflex scope on it, which is nice, but that's the only option. And then I run hard breaches, but claymores are also there. Kind of depends on the site and the play style you're going to go for. For Dokkaebi, I usually run the DMR now that they nerfed the Boss G's damage. The Boss G is also a decent option if you're just a Boss G fan, you like the Boss G. That's not a bad idea to use it. But the DMR is a 2-tap to most ops, so that's what I usually end up using. And then SMG-12, obviously. You're not going to want to use this. This has iron sights exclusively, and then the Gon 6 is not a good idea. Going to want to put on the SMG-12, and then I usually rock stuns on Dokkaebi, but if you need these other gadgets, they are there. For Lion, I usually use the V308. The DMR is the same as Twitch's DMR. It's really good. It's up to you which one you use, and you're never going to want to use the shotgun. And then the P9 is just better than the revolver, same as earlier. And then for Lion, I usually use frags or stuns. I never really touch claymores. Finka, you're definitely going to want to go with this LMG. It's just her best gun. You're never going to want to use the shotgun. The shotgun is horrible. It only does 26 damage as a shotgun. That's just not good. Pistol, it's up to you, as usual. This pistol has more damage, but lower magazine. I mean, it's just personal preference on the pistols. They don't really matter that much. And then frags or stuns or smokes. It's just depending on what you're going to be doing with her. For Maverick, you're probably going to want to use the M4 most times, but the DMR is okay if you're just going to be like baiting on the wall maybe. It's better damage, but that's about it. and then he only has one pistol. I usually run claymores on him because, like I said, he's a main breach operator. You don't want to get ran out on or flanked, but stuns are also a good pick, or smokes if you want to make a play with the defuse. For Nomad, I just use the AK. More bullets, more or less, a little less damage, more magazine size, pretty much the same fire rate. I just like the AK more. The ARX isn't bad though. It only has 20 bullets in the mag is my issue. And you guys are never going to want to touch this 7x scope pistol. It's horrible. So much recoil. As you can see on the recoil pattern, you can only see the first little, like this is a normal pistol. You can see all the way up to red, and this is the 7x scope. It's just unusable. And then I usually use stuns on Nomad. If you're going to be playing vert, then maybe the breach charge. Gridlock, you should never really use gridlock if Nomad's available. But if you do use her, you're going to use the F90 and the super shoddy. And I usually run frags or smokes on her. Never really use the impact EMPs unless I'm like needed and we don't have a Thatcher. I'll run EMPs. Same with Nook. You're going to want to use the FMG9 most of the time, but the shotgun is insanely OP. It has like no damage drop off. Legion also has this shotgun, and we'll get into that whenever we're on defensive operators, but the shotgun is just OP. The FMG is just better. You're usually going to want a far range gun more often than a shotgun on attack, but the shotgun is good to make plays sometimes. And then the Deagle is the better pistol here, does 70 damage. And then for the gadget, really depends on what your team needs. If your team doesn't need anything, I'd run frags. For Amaru, the loadout is like really dependent on what you're going to do. If you're going to rush in sight, you're going to want to get on the Supernova. If you're going to play more passive and you're just going to use your ability like sparingly, I'd run the LMG. And then for the secondary, you're always going to want to be on SMG-11. Never really going to want to use these. Definitely not the GON 6. And then for the gadget, I usually rock stuns unless I'm going for a vert play. Then I'll get on the hard breach. Callie, you're going to want to use the sniper, obviously. That's all she has. And then the secondary is going to be this SPS. This is the same pistol, machine pistols earlier. It has iron sights. It's hard to use. And you're not going to want to pick a pistol over an SMG. I usually run claymores because if you're playing Callie, you're usually baiting outside. Not going to want to get ran out on. Ayana, I use the G36. A lot of people do use the ARX for Ayana, but I like the G36 more. And then I run GON 6 with EMPs, but smokes are also there. She doesn't really have a great loadout besides her guns. For Ace, you're going to want to use the AK-12. You're never going to want to use this shotgun. He only has one pistol. I run claymores, but hard breach or soft breaches are also there. It just depends on what you're going to be doing. For Zero, I use the AR. Some people do like using the MP7 with an ACOG. It's really up to you, but the AR is better in my opinion. It does more damage, has less recoil. It's up to you, though. I definitely recommend trying them both out. It's pretty evenly matched. And then I use GON 6 with hard breaches or claymores. I usually run hard breaches, but I guess I was baiting outside last time I used them. That's why I used claymores on. So for Flores, I rock the AR-33. The DMR is good if you have a good trigger finger. He only has one pistol, and I usually run stuns, but same thing as before. If you're going to be outside a lot with them, I'd run the claymores. So for OSA, I use the 5.56. That's the same gun as Thermite. I do see people use the PDW a decent amount. I just don't like this gun, personally. I like the AR more. She only has one pistol. And then gadget, depends on what you're needed for. If you're not needed for anything, I'd run frags. Or maybe claymores if you want to like punch your shield and then put a claymore behind it. That's not a bad idea. Depends on what type of play you're going to make. Sins, you should never even be on Sins to begin with. His loadout is pretty horrible besides his DMR. I mean, his gun is okay, but it's just not great. Only one pistol. And then I usually would run, let's run like claymores, because you can maybe get a kill if you throw Sins one, then he runs up and hits a claymore behind it. Sins is just not a good operator. He's like worthless. He's not good in any scenario. For Grim, usually going to want to use this commando. I don't really see a play where the shotgun is good, and then you're going to want to put on the bailiff for just like destructive damage in case you can like shoot open softwall. It's the same gun as Doc has. And then, depending on what you're going to do, is like how you could determine what secondary to use for most of these ops. It just depends on what you're going to play. For Brava, she has the same DMR as Buck, which is horrible. Gonna want to use the Para 308 along with the Super Shoddy. And then smokes or claymores, just depends. Claymores more often though, if you're gonna be outside hacking stuff. Ram, definitely gonna want to run R4C with flashes and the only pistol. Like I said before, the LMG-E is unusable. Deimos, it really depends, because this pistol is pretty far range. Depends on like what you're gonna do. If you're gonna go below, maybe the shotgun's not a bad idea. The AK is gonna be better in most cases. You're gonna want to run frags on Deimos as well. And our last attacking operator, Aurora, she's pretty horrible. I'm not gonna lie. A lot of people use the DMR. It's a good DMR, but the LMG is not a horrible option either. She does have this fully automatic pistol, so you're definitely gonna want to use that over the normal pistol. And then breach charges are good because you can put them on the doors, and like if you see it open, you can actually detonate the breach charge and maybe get a kill. So that's why I run breach charges on Aurora. Okay, so coming over to the defenders, starting out with Sentry. This is the same as Striker. The guns, you're gonna want to use the SMG and the Super Shoddy. And then the gadget depends on what you're gonna do. I'm running C4 and a BP. You could also run C4 and a beeper. It just depends on what you're gonna like plan on doing. Smoke, you're gonna want to use the shotgun and the SMG-11. You're not really gonna touch this FMG ever. The shotgun's just better on defense, and then you're gonna want to run like barbed over the beepers. Same thing for mute. They got like the same loadout. You're gonna run shotgun, SMG-11, and C4. If an op has a C4, you're always gonna use it. Castle, they recently added back to ranked. Apparently the glitch is back in though. For his loadout, you're going to want to use the ump and the super shoddy. And BP or beepers. I run beepers, but the BP is a good option. For pulse, I recommend using the shotgun if you're going to play below, along with whichever pistol you personally prefer. And then you're definitely going to want to run C4 if you're playing pulse. For Doc, you're going to want to use the MP5 unless you're feeling like Mingo, then you could run the P90. Secondary, you're going to want to run Bailiff no matter what, just to help make rotates, and then I run Barbed on Doc. Same thing with Rook, MP5 unless you want to be like Mingo, then get on the P90. For the secondaries, I would normally recommend the P9, but the revolver can actually be decent to make like head holes. So just in case your team like somehow doesn't have a single shotgun, I usually just get on revolver, just in case I need to make head holes. And then for his gadget, I use impacts. For Capcan, you're gonna want to use the 9x19 every time. This is that horrible shotgun that Finka had. Pistol, it's personal preference. They're both pretty much the same. And then his gadget, he used to have a C4, which was great, but they took that away, so now I usually just run the Barb. If you want to run the BP, you can like put the BP right in front of a door and get on it. They might be distracted by the BP and just run through cap cans. It's not a bad idea, but I usually run Barb. It's just better. For Tachanka, it kind of depends. You could run the 9x19 with the ACOG if you want, or you could run the LMG. Definitely going to run bearing 9 as a secondary. And for his gadget, you're going to run the shield. For Jaeger, you're going to want to use the carbon. He only has one pistol, and then I use the BP. I don't know why the observation blocker's on. Bandit, you're going to run MP7. It's only one pistol again, and then C4. For Frost, you're going to want to use the 9mm. It's an SMG, but it's like basically AR. It does a lot of damage. This Super 90 is just horrible. You're never going to want to use that. And then you're going to use the ITA shoddy secondary. I run the shield on Frost. The BP's an okay option if you have no cams, no Valk or anything, no other BPs, but I'd run the shield. For Valk, you're going to run the MPX and the Deagle, and then you're going to run C4s. For Caveira, it kind of depends on what you're going to do. The shotgun's usually a better pick. And then she only has one pistol, and then I run impacts on Cav. On Echo, you're usually going to play him for this SMG with an ACOG. The Supernova is not a bad shotgun, but the SMG is better, and then I run Bearing 9 secondary with impacts. But the shield's also a good pick. If your team needs a shield, you can always switch over to the shield. You don't need the impacts that badly. For Mira, you're going to want to use the Vector and the ITA Shoddy with the C4. So for Legion, it's personal preference on what you're going to do. The T5 has like no recoil, so you could run the T5, or the shotgun is always a good pick because the shotgun is OP. I know it only has 46 damage, but it's like an automatic shoddy if you shoot it quick enough, and it has no damage drop off pretty much. So it depends on how you're going to play. Usually, if you're going to run the shotgun, you're going to run pistol secondary. If you're going to run that T5, use super shoddy. And then I use BP. The observation blockers are pretty useless in most cases. On Ella, I use their shotgun. The Scorpion has a ton of recoil. That's why I don't use it. And then she only has one pistol. Same thing as Echo. Run impact, but if your team needs a shield, you can always get on it. On Vigil, his gun is personal preference after the Boss G nerf. K1A is not bad, but I still rock Boss G, and then SMG 12 over the C75 every time, and then you're going to run impacts. For Maestro, you're going to use the LMG and the Bailiff, and then either Barbed or impacts. Kind of depends. I'm on Barb most recently because my team needed me on Barb. Needed to put Barb down. Alibi, you're gonna. I also want to tell you guys, you got to use default gun skins, default like operator outfits, or else you're not gonna blend in with your clones. So that's why I have no camo on this. Kind of depends on what you like. If you have a good trigger finger, this gun's not bad. It's like a tap fire shotgun, DMR type thing. I usually use SMG though. And then you're going to want to run Bailiff for secondary, and then I run Beepers over observation blockers. For Clash, you obviously have to use the shield as your main, and then her secondary, pretty much always going to be this SPS, and then impacts. Cade, some people that have like bad trigger fingers, I know, like to use the AUG, but the TSG shotgun is just so good, you have to use it. I feel like the AUG is just, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage if you're using the AUG over the TCS. And then use the revolver over to this like crazy recoil gun. It's just not worth running that. And then C4. Mozzie, I usually use the P10. It only has 16 bullets in it, so, I mean, some people might not like that. You might want to use the Commando 9 if that's you. He only has one pistol, and then I run C4 on Mozzie. Warden, pretty much always going to use the shotgun. I don't really see a scenario where the MPX is a better pick. And then you're going to want to be on the SMG 12. Not really going to touch this pistol unless you're just going for one taps with it. It does have a reflex scope. And then depending on the scenario, you're going to run shield or C4. I'd recommend just by default being on C4. If your team needs a shield, then you can always switch over. For Goyo, I know I said the TCS is a good gun, but the Vector with an ACOG is just crazy. Best fire rate in the game. Definitely going to run the Vector, and he only has one pistol, and then impacts. For Wamai, I usually use the MP5K. The AUG's not a bad pick, per se. I prefer the MP5K more. And you're going to run the Keratos 357, because it has some medium destruction, so you can make head holes. And then you're going to run impacts on Wamai. I don't know why beepers were selected. For Oryx, you're pretty much always using the T5 with the Bailiff, along with Barbed. For Malusi, you're going to run MP5 and the ITA with impacts. Aruni, unless you're really a fan of the P10, I guess you could use it, but the DMR is just better, especially if you have a decent trigger finger. DMR on defense is great. One pistol and then Barbed. Thunderbird, pretty much using the spear every time with the ITA. If you're going to use the shotgun, then I would recommend getting on the Bearing 9. But if you're on the spear, get on the ITA. Then for the gadget, usually going to get on shield, but you also have barb and a BP if you need it. For Thorn, you're using the SMG, and this is the only time you're going to use this machine pistol because she has no other options. And then either barbed or the shield, either one. Barbed is better because you can put your Thorn trap down and they can maybe get stuck in the barb. But Thorn's not a great operator though. Probably won't get any kills with Thorn traps in today's age if you're not if you're over silver, you're not getting kills with that. For a zombie, it depends on what you're going to be doing, and that's what her loadout depends on. Like, if you're going to be just holding a little pixel on your zombies, I'd run the shotgun. But if you're going to be more, like, holding rafters on Clubhouse, then I would go the SMG. Then she only has the deagle, and then usually you'd run around impacts. But if your team needs barbed wire, then get on barbed wire. Solace, you're going to use the shotgun and the SMG. The P90 is not bad, but it has no ACOG. Like Doc and Rook, they do have ACOG on this, but Solus only has the one-time scope. I usually just use the shotgun and the SMG if I ever touch Solus, but Solus is like heavy nerfed now. She's not really worth playing. Fenrir, gonna use MP7. Never gonna touch the shotgun. Bailiff, BP. Tubero, most of the time you're gonna use the DMR unless you, like I said before, have a bad trigger finger. Then you could get on the MPX, I guess, but DMR is just better, more damage. You're gonna run a T4. The final defensive op of the video. Scopos should never be running her. She has no options. You can only use this AR, only use this pistol, and gonna run impacts over beepers. And really quick, I'd like to just go through some attachments and some advice. If an operator has an ACOG, pretty much gonna use the ACOG no matter what. No preference on which one you use. I personally like using this one right here, the middle one, Magnifying B. But on DMRs, I will use Magnifying A. Magnifying C is never really a good pick. It's just kind of too much on the scope. These two are the best ones. This one, Magnifying B, is the best one, in my opinion. And then the barrel kind of depends on how much recoil the gun has. Like the M4 has no recoil, in my opinion. It's really easy to control, so I run extended barrel. Vertical grip on every operator. It's not worth hopping on horizontal or anything. And then laser, it's personal preference. If you're getting found in corners by people looking at your laser, then take it off. It doesn't really help that much. By default, I usually use compensator on my guns. That reduces the like side-to-side recoil and makes it more just up and down, easier to control. Unless the gun has a ton of recoil, like Twitch F2, I will run Flash Hider on, which reduces the up and down recoil. And then on DMRs, you're going to want to use either muzzle brake, or if it has access to an extended barrel, then use that. But if you're going to be playing like mute in the corner with a shotgun, that is one scenario where you're definitely not going to want to laser on, because that could give you away and get you pre-fired. If you guys enjoyed this video and it helped you out, I'd appreciate if you dropped a like and subscribe. I'm also streaming on Twitch, and I'll put that on screen right now. If you're into like longer form content, come check out the Twitch stream. It's going to be streaming like pretty much every day. Once again, thank you guys for watching.